I woke up this morning with that quiet, almost lazy feeling that birthdays have a way of sneaking in on you when you least expect it. The kind of calm where the house is still, and the only sound is the gentle hum of the ceiling fan. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and for a moment, just let the sunlight warm my face through the curtains. There was a faint smell of coffee already in the kitchen, the kind that promised a little comfort before the day began. I smiled softly to myself, thinking how birthdays have changed over the years. Less noise, fewer grand gestures. But somehow, the small things feel heavier, more meaningful. I padded barefoot across the cold wooden floor to the kitchen. The birthday cake from yesterday still sat in the fridge, slightly leaning but intact. I could smell the faint sweetness of frosting mixed with the faint aroma of old vanilla. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the steam curling around my fingers. I took a sip and let the bitterness settle in, grounding me. Sometimes, it's the little moments like this, the quiet, the ordinary, that hold the most weight. That I glanced around the living room. The decorations I had lazily strung up the night before swayed slightly in the morning breeze from the open window. A single balloon drooped in the corner, half deflated. It felt strangely poetic. Birthdays used to feel like fireworks. Now they felt like the gentle flicker of a candle, warm but fleeting. I could almost hear the echoes of my past birthdays. Here, laughter bouncing off walls, my daughter running around with glitter on her cheeks, my spouse trying to surprise me with gifts I pretended not to notice. Those days felt both distant and near at the same time, like watching a home video from behind a fogged-up window. That I picked up my phone, scrolling through notifications slowly, without really expecting anything. Messages from friends wishing me happy birthday, a few emojis thrown in to remind me they hadn't forgotten. I smiled faintly, tapping a reply here and there, but my mind kept drifting. There was this strange, hollow feeling I couldn't shake. Not sadness exactly, but the kind of emptiness that whispers quietly, something is about to change. I rubbed my hands together, feeling the rough calluses from years of work. They reminded me of all the birthdays that passed without much notice, the ones that blurred together. And yet, there was a strange peace in that, too. A reminder that life moves on, regardless of the noise we make. I sat at the table a little longer, staring at the sunlight sliding across the worn surface, letting the quiet settle. It was just another morning, I told myself. Just another birthday. But deep down, I had this inexplicable feeling that today wouldn't be like the others. Something, or someone, was coming, and my heart, in its stubborn way, knew it before my mind did. The doorbell rang just as I was reaching for my second cup of coffee. It was a sharp, clear chime that seemed out of place in the quiet morning. My first thought was, who could that be? No one ever comes over this early. I froze for a second, listening to the faint echo of footsteps on the porch outside. The hum of the ceiling fan suddenly felt louder, the silence in the house heavier. That I walked toward the door, each step slower than the last. The cold metal of the handle pressed against my palm, and I felt that tiny flicker of anticipation in my chest, the same one you get when you know life is about to hand you something unexpected. My hand lingered for a moment before I turned. The door creaking slightly as it opened, and there she was. My daughter. But not the little girl I remembered running around the garden with mud-stained sneakers, not the shy teenager who used to clutch my hand when meeting strangers. She stood tall, poised, confident, every inch the person she had become. She smiled at me, that same mischievous, familiar smile that made my chest tighten. Then, without hesitation, she said, "Like the house I gave you?" The words hit me, like a punch I didn't see coming. I blinked, unsure if I had heard correctly. The house. My mind went blank. Did she mean this house? Had she really? I couldn't process it. My brain raced through possibilities, loans, inheritance, some elaborate joke. But nothing prepared me for the reality of it. The sunlight behind her cast her in a kind of halo, making her look larger than life. I noticed the subtle designer touches in her outfit, the faint scent of perfume, the glint of a watch catching the morning light. Everything about her screamed success, control, independence. And here I was, standing in the middle of my own living room, suddenly realizing that things had shifted. Permanently. I stepped aside, letting her in, but I couldn't stop my eyes from scanning the house. It felt different somehow. The furniture looked newer, the walls had a subtle sheen that hadn't been there yesterday. and even the air seemed charged with energy, as if the house itself recognized the presence of its benefactor. I wanted to ask questions, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, fumbling for words that wouldn't come to I in that moment. A memory flashed across my mind. Her as a child, shyly knocking on our front door with a handmade card in hand, eyes wide with hope and excitement. Back then, she was small and unsure, but that spark, the one that had made me proud even when I didn't fully understand her ambitions, was still there. And now, standing before me, it had grown into something I barely recognized, yet somehow felt connected to. I motioned for her to take a seat, feeling the quiet hum of tension and wonder filling the space between us. My heart was pounding, not with fear, exactly, but with something like anticipation, the feeling that today, everything I thought I knew was about to be rewritten. I stood there, still gripping the edge of the doorframe, staring at her. My daughter, the same one who used to sneak cookies from the kitchen and ask a million questions about the world, now looked like she stepped out of a magazine. The words she dropped were still ringing in my ears. Like the house I gave you? It took a few moments for my brain to catch up. The house she gave me? My eyes wandered around the room, tracing the subtle changes I hadn't even noticed yet. The walls seemed brighter, the furniture polished and rearranged, the floors gleaming like they had been scrubbed by someone who cared more than I realized. Even the old rug looked new, as if it had been carefully replaced. Every corner whispered that someone had invested time, money, and intention here. My daughter, I felt a strange mix of pride and disbelief. How had she done this? Where had this wealth come from? Was this real? I wanted to laugh, maybe in nervous disbelief, or cry because the person I raised had grown into someone I barely recognized. She watched me quietly, a small, teasing smile playing on her lips, almost as if she could see my thoughts. And maybe she could. Her outfit caught my eye again. The fine fabric, subtle stitching, every detail carefully chosen. I noticed the faint scent of perfume, the polished shoes, the delicate way she carried herself. She was confident, poised, successful, and she had chosen this moment, my birthday, to show me. My mind reeled that a memory surfaced, sharp and vivid. Her, as a little girl, building towers from toy blocks, her tongue sticking out in concentration. She had always been ambitious in small ways, determined to finish what she started, to prove herself even in tiny victories. Back then, I had smiled at her intensity, never imagining that one day it would manifest in this way. The thought that she had grown into someone who could gift me an entire house in such secrecy left me staggering. I opened my mouth, but the words got caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. You did all this? I finally managed, my voice barely steady. She nodded, her smile softening, a trace of vulnerability showing beneath the confidence. I wanted it to be a surprise, she said, but I wasn't sure if I should feel grateful, impressed, or unsettled. The enormity of what she had done was almost paralyzing. The house itself seemed to hum with the presence of her touch. Every piece of furniture, every subtle detail, every freshly painted wall spoke of her vision and her love, or at least her intention to care. And yet, beneath my pride, a tiny, nagging thought wormed its way in. Why didn't she tell me? Why? The secrecy? I couldn't help but glance at the small details, the little things she might have left for me to discover. A vase placed exactly where I liked it, a photograph framed in a spot I had always adored. Each choice was deliberate, each touch personal. And suddenly, the shock melted into something more complex. Awe, confusion, and a tentative kind of gratitude that I realized, standing there, that life had changed in an instant. This wasn't just a gift. It was a statement, a message from her about who she had become, and maybe about who she thought I should be. And in that moment, the ordinary rhythm of my birthday had been replaced with something extraordinary, something I would never forget. After the initial shock settled, a different feeling crept in, something heavier, colder. Suspicion. It started as a small, almost imperceptible tick at the back of my mind, but it grew, gnawing at the edges of my pride. Why now? Why didn't she tell me earlier? I couldn't shake the thought. It wasn't just the surprise of wealth, it was the secrecy, the deliberate silence that had allowed me to wake up this morning thinking it would be ordinary. I wandered through the living room, my fingers brushing against the polished wood of the banister, lingering on familiar surfaces that now felt unfamiliar. The sound of the ticking clock was louder somehow, echoing in the hollow space between my thoughts. I sipped my coffee again, bitter now, and realized I hadn't actually tasted it since the visitor arrived. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the cocktail of pride, confusion, and unease that churned in my chest. Questions spiraled faster than I could answer them. Did she borrow money to do this? Did someone else help? Or, my mind couldn't go there, but it still did. I kept catching myself thinking, maybe she's showing off. Maybe this isn't about me at all. And with that thought came guilt. Guilt that I even suspected her. My daughter. The same person who had spent her childhood dreaming of ways to make me proud. And yet, the unease wouldn't leave that I paused by the window, watching the wind ruffle the curtains. Outside, the garden was immaculate, almost too perfect. It was beautiful, yes, but it also whispered of intentions carefully hidden. My mind flashed back to those small arguments about money when she was a teenager, the minor tensions over allowances, college funds, and birthday gifts. I'd laughed them off at the time, thinking it was just growing pains. But now, looking at her, I wondered if those were the first signs of a careful, deliberate planning I had never fully noticed. That I walked back to the living room, trying to focus on the warmth beneath the shock, the pride that I had a daughter who could achieve such things. But the warmth was tangled with the cold thread of doubt. Why this house? Why this birthday? I wanted to ask her directly, but each time I opened my mouth, the words felt too fragile, too loaded with emotion to speak aloud. That a faint memory surfaced. Her sitting at the kitchen table years ago, scribbling in a notebook, furiously determined. Eyes blazing with a secret ambition she refused to share. I had watched her with a mixture of admiration and worry, telling myself she was just dreaming, just growing. Now, I realized those small, secretive moments had been the first chapters of this story, one I hadn't seen unfolding until it hit me in the form of a fully realized, tangible gift. That I sat back down at the table, letting my coffee cool, feeling a strange mixture of awe and anxiety knotting in my stomach. This wasn't just about a house. It was about her independence, her power, her choices, and the truth that stung most. I had no idea how much she had grown beyond me, and maybe, just maybe, I wasn't entirely ready for it. That I finally turned toward her, trying to steady my voice, though my chest felt tight and my fingers were clammy. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, carefully, almost whispering, as if the walls themselves might judge my words. Her smile softened, almost apologetic, and she tilted her head. I wanted it to be a surprise, she said, voice light, almost teasing, but there was a flicker behind her eyes I couldn't read, a hesitation, a trace of vulnerability. That I wanted to believe her. I tried, but my mind raced faster than my heart could follow. A surprise? Or a test? The question echoed in the room, and I couldn't shake it. Every detail of the house, every subtle upgrade, every shine and polish now seemed loaded with meaning. Nothing felt accidental. She had planned this meticulously, and yet she presented it with this casual air, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That I looked at her, really looked, trying to find traces of the little girl I knew. There they were, in the curve of her smile, the sparkle in her eyes, in the way she paused just long enough to let me process the words before speaking. But beneath it all, there was the unmistakable aura of someone who had grown, evolved, and now stood on a level that was both inspiring and intimidating. The air in the living room felt thick, heavy with unspoken tension. The faint scent of her perfume mingled with the lingering aroma of my cold coffee, the familiar smell of home suddenly feeling like a stage set. Every footstep she took on the polished hardwood sounded amplified in my ears, echoing like the soft drum of an approaching storm. I wanted to reach out, to close the gap between us, but my pride and confusion held me back. That a flash of memory hit me then, her as a child, sitting on the kitchen counter, fidgeting with a pencil, looking up at me with wide eyes and saying, "I'll make you proud one day, Dad." Back then, it had felt like a promise that was cute and childish. Now, it was a promise realized, delivered in a way I had never expected, and I wasn't sure whether to be overwhelmed with joy or swallowed by doubt. That I swallowed hard, searching her expression for truth. You've really done this. On your own? I asked, my voice quivering slightly. She nodded again, and for a moment, the weight of her gaze pressed into me. I realized that she was waiting, not for praise, not for questions, but for acknowledgement. A silent plea for understanding that felt almost sacred in its honesty that I hesitated, unsure if I could voice all the swirling emotions inside me. Pride, confusion, awe, and a whisper of something I didn't want to admit, fear. Fear that I might never fully understand her choices. Fear that she had grown so far beyond the world I knew, that I might be left behind in my own home. And yet, beneath it all, a fragile thread of hope flickered. Maybe, just maybe, this could be a moment of connection. I gestured toward the living room, my hands slightly trembling. Come, sit, let's talk, I said, and she moved with ease, crossing the polished floor. Every movement, every gesture was deliberate, graceful, almost measured. And in that simple act, I realized that this confrontation wasn't about blame or accusation. It was about understanding, however tentative, however fragile it might be. After she sat down, a silence stretched between us, thick and charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. I watched her closely, trying to read every gesture, every flicker of expression. And then I noticed the little things, the subtle inconsistencies that made my chest tighten. A framed photograph slightly out of place, the way she avoided my eyes when I asked a casual question about her work, the faint hum of her phone vibrating against the table but never leaving her hand. That I felt my stomach twist. This isn't just a gift. She's hiding things I'm not supposed to see. My mind raced through possibilities, some logical, some absurd. Did she inherit this wealth? Did she work herself into exhaustion in silence? Or is there something she's keeping from me? The unease coiled tighter around my chest with every passing second. The air smelled faintly of perfume and polish, mingling with the aroma of old wood and lingering coffee. I picked up a coaster from the table and turned it over, as if inspecting. It could reveal answers I wasn't getting from her eyes. Every detail in the house now felt intentional, almost staged. I loved the gesture. Truly, I did. But I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that this wasn't the whole story. That a memory surfaced, sharp and unbidden. Her teenage years, sneaking out late at night, whispering secrets I dismissed as teenage rebellion. Back then, I had laughed it off. Now, each of those small acts seemed like clues, small pieces of a puzzle I had ignored, and they suddenly felt significant. Had she always been this careful? This deliberate? Was the little girl I thought I knew actually building a life I hadn't been allowed to see? I tried to steady my thoughts, telling myself I was overreacting. She's just independent, that's all. But the unease didn't leave. I caught her glance flickering toward the window, toward the garden she had obviously taken care of, and then back to me with a small, almost apologetic smile. It was like she knew I was questioning her, and maybe she even expected it. That I took a deep breath, feeling the cold air from the open window brushing against my cheek. My fingers traced the edge of the table, grounding me, reminding me that I was still in my own home, even if it didn't feel entirely familiar anymore. And yet, my mind kept circling back. Why keep this a secret? Why not share it with me before today? There was a tension in her posture, too, a subtle stiffness that hinted at her own vulnerability. She wanted approval, yes, but she was also guarding herself, standing behind the shield of her accomplishment. I realized that maybe the betrayal I felt wasn't entirely hers. It was mine too. I hadn't been paying close enough attention. I hadn't noticed the signs, the careful planning, the quiet determination that had been there all along. And in that quiet, heavy moment, I understood something. This house, this gift, was more than bricks and paint. It was her story, her success, her independence, delivered in a way I wasn't entirely prepared to accept. And the truth, sharp and undeniable, cut through me. I had been blind, and maybe I still didn't fully know my daughter at all. That I sank into the armchair, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on my chest. The room felt smaller now, almost suffocating, though the sunlight still spilled across the floor. I ran a hand over my face, feeling the rough texture of my stubble, the faint warmth of tears I hadn't let fall yet. My daughter sat across from me, quietly waiting, her expression unreadable, and I realized I didn't know how to bridge the gap between awe, pride, and the hollow ache gnawing at my heart. I tasted bitterness in my mouth, coffee gone cold, mixed with the strange tang of disbelief and self-reproach. Did I fail her? Did I fail as a parent? The questions repeated themselves like a broken record. Memories I had tucked away came flooding back. Her childhood birthday, when she looked disappointed because the gift wasn't what she had imagined. The time she stayed up late to finish a school project I didn't even notice. The way she would quietly excel while I was distracted by the chaos of life. All those tiny moments I thought were inconsequential suddenly screamed at me, a harsh indictment of my inattentiveness that I closed my eyes and let the tears come. Finally, they burned, but the release was necessary. I felt the hollow space inside me expand, as if the shock of her gift had ripped open something deeper. Years of unspoken expectations, small regrets, and quiet fears. I had always thought I knew her, that I understood her ambitions, but now I saw how much of her life I had been blind to. That a flashback hit me. A Sunday afternoon years ago, watching her play in the garden, building towers from sticks and dirt, so focused and serious about her creations. I had laughed, thinking it was just a child's fancy, never imagining that intensity would one day translate into a world I barely recognized. And now, that little girl had become a woman who could give me a house, a testament to her drive, her independence, and her secrecy. That I felt anger mixed with my grief, not toward her, exactly, but at myself. Anger that I hadn't noticed, that I hadn't guided, that I had let her world grow quietly around me while I remained complacent. I wanted to yell, to demand explanations, but the words were trapped behind the storm of emotion in my chest. I wanted to curl up somewhere, away from polished floors and the scent of perfume and coffee, and just let the world pause for a moment. That I looked at her then, and something in me softened despite the turmoil. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She had achieved something incredible and wanted to share it in her own way. But that didn't stop the ache, the realization that life had moved so far ahead while I was still catching up. I could feel a hollow emptiness, the pang of missed moments, and the quiet understanding that parenthood sometimes means being a spectator to the very children you raised. The rain began outside, soft at first, then steadily, tapping against the window pane. Each drop seemed to echo my heartbeat, slow and relentless. I let myself sink deeper into the armchair, letting the tears and the storm mingle, letting the heartbreak wash over me. It was raw, it was unfiltered, and it was, somehow, necessary. After what felt like hours of silence, I realized I couldn't stay trapped in the whirlwind of my own thoughts any longer. I looked at her, my daughter, sitting there with that quiet patience that had always been part of her, even as a child. Something in me shifted. Maybe it was the way the sunlight caught the edge of her hair, or the faint scent of her perfume blending with the lingering coffee aroma. Whatever it was, I felt a fragile urge to reach out, to try to bridge the gap that had yawned open between us. I cleared my throat and asked, "Tell me about it. Your life, your work, everything. I want to understand." My voice was hesitant, fragile, almost as if I were testing whether it was safe to speak again. She nodded and leaned forward, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips, like she had been waiting for this moment. The tension in the room eased slightly, though. It was still undercurrent, like the faint hum of distant thunder. She began to talk, and I listened. Really listened. She spoke of her struggles, her long nights, the risks she had taken to get here. Every word painted a picture of dedication and courage, of a life built quietly, meticulously, without seeking recognition. I felt my chest tighten. Again, but this time it wasn't just anxiety or doubt. It was a complex mix of pride and awe. She had become a person I could admire, someone who had accomplished more than I could have imagined. And yet, here she was, sitting across from me, inviting me into her world. That I poured us both another cup of coffee, the steam curling between us like a fragile bridge. The sound of it filling the quiet room was comforting, grounding. We talked about the house, the subtle touches, the furniture she had chosen, the way she had thought of every detail. She laughed softly at a memory of me complaining about a crooked picture frame years ago, and I realized she had remembered everything. Every small moment mattered to her, and now it all culminated in this overwhelming, tangible act of love. For the first time since she arrived, I let myself smile. Tentatively, yes, but genuinely. I felt a connection sparking through the tension, fragile and bright. I could almost see the little girl who had once hugged me tightly after a scraped knee blending seamlessly with the woman she had become, confident, capable, and fiercely loving. And in that convergence, I felt hope, a delicate, tentative hope, that maybe we could navigate this new reality together, without fear or misunderstanding. The rain outside had softened to a gentle patter, and the smell of wet earth mixed with the warm indoor air. I realized then that this attempt at connection, fragile as it was, mattered more than anything else. Words hadn't fixed everything, and the past couldn't be rewritten, but we could start here, in this room, with coffee and conversation and the faint acknowledgement of the bond that had always existed between us. That I watched her smile again, a small, knowing curve of her lips, and for the first time that day, I felt the weight in my chest lighten. Maybe we didn't need to understand everything to appreciate it. Maybe, just maybe, love could be enough, messy, imperfect, but undeniably real. To be why the time the afternoon sun had fully settled into the sky, I found myself sitting back in the armchair, coffee long finished, watching her move through the house with ease. The initial tension, the doubts and suspicions, had begun to fade, replaced by something quieter, steadier. I realized that the house, the gift, the secrecy, it wasn't about control or showing off. It was her way of expressing care, gratitude, and love. I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight on my chest ease just a little. I thought about all the moments I had missed, the teenage years when I was too distracted to notice her efforts, the tiny achievements she quietly celebrated, the countless ways she had grown into someone extraordinary without demanding my attention. And now, here she was, giving me something tangible, a piece of her world, as if saying, "I see you, Dad, and I want you to share in this part of me." The sunlight caught the edges of the polished furniture, highlighting the subtle touches. She had added tiny frames of family photos, a throw I had always loved draped over the sofa, a vase placed perfectly on the table. Each detail was a reminder that she had considered my preferences, my memories, my comfort. And I understood then that the gift wasn't just about money or the house itself. It was about thoughtfulness, intention, and connection. I thought back to when she was a toddler, hugging me tightly after a scraped knee, eyes wide with fear and trust. That same bond existed now, only stronger, deeper, and wrapped in the maturity of adulthood. I realized that I didn't need to fully understand the magnitude of her achievement to feel gratitude. I didn't need to analyze every motive or hidden intention. What mattered was that this was her way of saying she loved me. I walked slowly through the house, touching the walls, the furniture, feeling the spaces she had altered. Everything felt like a reflection of her, careful, deliberate, full of intention. And for the first time that day, I felt fully present. The shock, the confusion, the betrayal, all of it had settled into understanding. Acceptance. I turned to her and smiled, openly this time. "Thank you," I said softly, and I meant it in every way possible. She returned the smile, gentle and warm, and I felt a quiet joy that had nothing to do with money or possessions. It had to do with connection, with love, with the strange, beautiful complexity of parenthood. Sitting back down, I let my eyes wander around the house, taking in both the old and the new, the familiar and the surprising. Life had a way of moving forward, and sometimes it swept us along in ways we didn't anticipate. But I realized now that I could embrace it. I could accept it. And more importantly, I could accept her, the daughter I raised, the woman she had become, and the love she was showing me in her own extraordinary way. As evening settled over the house, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, the soft glow of the lamps casting long shadows across the walls. The rain had stopped, leaving a faint scent of wet earth drifting in through the open window. I cradled a warm cup of tea in my hands, letting its heat seep into my fingers, grounding me in the present. For the first time all day, I felt a deep, quiet peace. I thought about the morning, the calm, the shock, the heartbreak, the tentative hope, and now this stillness. It had been a journey in a single day, an emotional roller coaster I wasn't prepared for, yet somehow grateful to have experienced. My daughter's presence, her gift, her words, and her quiet patience had shifted something inside me. I realized that life doesn't always give you the luxury of understanding everything at once. Sometimes it asks you to feel first, to let the heart catch up with reality. That I gazed around the house, noticing the subtle details she had left behind. Familiar furniture polished with care, a vase perfectly positioned on the table, framed photos that captured moments of our lives together. These small touches told a story I hadn't been able to read before, a story of love expressed through intention rather than words. And I understood. I didn't need to dissect it, question it, or unravel it to pieces. I just needed to accept it. Memories floated through my mind. Her as a little girl, her as a teenager, her as the confident woman who had just gifted me this house. Each memory intertwined, a tapestry of moments that formed the person she had become and the bond we shared. I realized that parenthood is not about controlling or predicting the path of your children. It's about witnessing their journey, marveling at the distance they've traveled, and being there when they choose to share their world with you. I leaned back, letting the warmth of the room wrap around me. The faint hum of the ceiling fan, the soft ticking of the clock, the lingering scent of rain and flowers blending together. My heart felt full in a quiet, almost imperceptible way. There was still a twinge of melancholy, a recognition that time moves quickly and moments like these are fleeting. But there was also gratitude for her, for the life we shared, for the unspoken love that had carried us through years of growth and distance. That I watched as she prepared to leave, her coat draped over her arm, a small smile on her face. "I'll see you soon, Dad," she said, and I nodded, unable to find words that matched the depth of what I felt. As the door closed behind her, I stayed in the living room a little longer, letting the silence settle. The house no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt lived in, loved, and remarkably alive. And in that stillness, I realized something simple but profound. Life doesn't always give you clarity, but it gives you moments, moments to hold, to cherish, to reflect upon. I sat quietly, sipping my tea, letting the memories and emotions mingle. I didn't need to fully understand everything she had done. I didn't need to unravel the complexity of her gift. I only needed to feel it, and that, I knew, was enough.